Stories of police using excessive force, being trigger happy, quick to shoot the family animal, and using police resources to publicly embarrass people, as well as overuse of county vehicles for personal use, are some of the stories being told on social media. Give a brief explanation of what you plan to do to improve these conditions and public perception of the LaPorte County Police Department. How do you plan to work with the union to ensure that the officers accused of misconduct are handled appropriately?
Well, I think the answer to that question comes down to leadership. If you have strong leadership and you set out expectations for those that are under your span of control and in your command, those employees will fall into place. They'll know what is to be expected. You also set a standard just by the way you live your life, the way you have worked your career. And I think you should be a role model and a mentor for other officers as well. But certainly you need to set clear expectations for those that work within the department. I'm very fortunate that I've not seen those abuses of power that you were talking about here at the LaPorte County Sheriff's Office. There's always the question of people using their police cars off duty. And the county council makes it clear to us that that's part of our salary. And in fact, the sheriff and the council and the commission have always encouraged our officers to drive their cars off duty. Well, there are certain limitations to that, of course, because it's always an extra officer that's out there that's available to answer calls. In fact, I can think of many times during the course of my career, my nearest backup was 20 minutes away. And if it hadn't been for an officer in a take-home car, they came and actually bailed me out and was able to be my backup, my primary backup officer. I can think of times my phone is rung at 3:30 in the morning, and it's the dispatch center saying, we're really getting it handed to us right now. We have an alarm at 39 of the state line. I live in Heston. Can you respond because you live so close? And I hop in my take-home car and I respond to that call. So there is a give and a take when it comes to that. I think that when there is an allegation of an abuse of power, it needs to be immediately investigated. It needs to be investigated by the administration, and if it looks like it could be something criminal in nature, it immediately needs to be handed over to an independent agency, say for instance the Indiana State Police, so they can make an unbiased opinion and do an unbiased investigation, see if it's worthy of criminal charges. Sometimes it may just be someone getting a little overboard, but our officers are in harm's way each and every day. And with the advent of social media and handheld cameras, oftentimes what we see on YouTube or on Facebook or Twitter is just a little snippet of what really happened. And so I think you need to have the totality of the circumstances. And I don't think we should use social media as a barometer as to how we're doing our job. What should be the barometer of how we're doing our job is to get out in the community, and get out in the individual communities and find out from them how the public thinks that we're doing our job and what suggestions that they may have.
Steve, the question, two-part question. Stories of police using excessive force, being trigger happy, quick to shoot the family animal, and using police resources to publicly embarrass people, as well as overuse of county vehicles for personal use, are some of the stories being told on social media. Give a brief explanation of what you plan to do to improve these conditions and public perception of the LaPorte County Sheriff's Department. Second part, how do you plan to work with the union to ensure the officers accused of misconduct are handled appropriately?
Well, the social media part, yes, we shouldn't depend on social media, but it does have its place. It can flag us. I had an interview once for a job, and I'll never forget what this interviewer asked me. He said, "What do you think the mark of a good technician is?" I've been a radio frequency technician most of my life, and he wanted to know what the mark of a good technician was. Well, I can't tell you what my answer was. I've long forgotten that. But he said what he thought was the mark of a good technician is someone who could recognize that there was a problem. People don't complain for nothing. These things aren't on the social networks for nothing. There's something to them. We may not have the whole story, and I agree with that, but here's a report that if you have any interest at all, you should take a look at it. It's done by the ACLU, and I know I'm not a big fan of the ACLU either, but they do try to defend the Bill of Rights. And this is some research that they did. They sent out questionnaires to about 200 and some police departments. Only about 100 and some responded, but they wanted to know the uses of the equipment and the special weapons and tactics that were going on. And this is full of horror stories, of not just dogs getting shot, but people. There's one in here of a SWAT team that went to arrest, had a warrant for a person. They found him in the front yard of the house. Didn't have a warrant for anything else, but if they could find him in the house, they were to go in the house. They decided to go in the house anyway. The old grandfather that was in there followed all their instructions, laid on the floor, put his hands above his head, and accidentally got shot by one of the M15s or AR-15s that the officer was carrying, and was killed. And that story repeats all across the nation. And it's really coming to light here now with a lot of these things. So we need to get a grip on some of these things. Now, I'm sorry, the
Second part of the question, how do you plan to work with the union to ensure that the officers accused of misconduct are handled appropriately?
well, I'm hoping, first of all, that we don't get to that point, that we have them trained enough that, yes, they have these military instincts. They're coming out now with this training that they're warriors, and we end up being the enemy in those things. So we have to try and constrain them a little bit so that we don't get to that. But I have worked with unions before, not a lot, minimally, but I sympathize with their positions as well, and the dangers that these guys face on the road every day and even at home.
If you could.
Sure. Stories of police using excessive force, being trigger happy, quick to shoot the family animal, and using police resources to publicly embarrass people, as well as the overuse of county vehicles for personal use, are some of the stories being told on social media. Give a brief explanation of what you plan to do to improve these conditions and public perception of the LaPorte County Sheriff's Department. Second part, how do you plan to work with the union to ensure that the officers accused of misconduct are handled appropriately?
The people in here that know who I am, I'm not a big fan of the social media world. I don't have a Facebook account. I wouldn't know how to get on it. I don't do Twitter. I don't have an email. I pride myself with personal contact with people. That holds a person accountable just by that. A handshake can go a long way. So the social media, I'm not totally against it. It doesn't work for me in my life. It's proven to me day in, day out by talking with people, I mean not you, but people in the public that tell me how much drama is involved with it. And as an official that works for all of the public, we need, again, I've said this earlier, we need to be accountable to you, and we need to be held at a higher standard. So with all that put in place, I'm not a big fan of it. I realize I live in 2014, and it's here to stay. It's a great tool if you want to communicate with friends in Arizona and things of that nature, but it just seems like we abuse that, everything that's good in the world these days. It's an unfortunate thing, but nonetheless, it is occurring. So as far as some of the other things that were referred to, I think it was quick shooting or quick, I'm not sure of the verbiage
Quick
there.
to shoot the family animal, using police resources to publicly embarrass people, and the overuse of county vehicles for personal use.
Just addressing the quick to shoot the animals, I'll agree with Major Boyd on that. I'm not aware of that occurring with our department. You hear of things in the news and in the media where law enforcement may have acted inappropriately or appropriately. Again, I'm not going to comment on whether right or wrong without not knowing, but I do know as a firearms instructor with the academy, we are held again to a higher standard. There's a use of force the force continuum that we are held to for every time that we would discharge our weapon. So, speaking here and staying on focus for LaPorte County, because that's why we're here, I'm not familiar with it. I've never seen it in my 20 years. So, in that respect, I really don't. Again, I'll agree with Major Boyd on that. So, which is a tribute to the men and women that work for our department. We have professionals here, and they're doing a good job. So, and the second part of it, I'm sorry.
How do you plan to work with the union to ensure that the officers accused of misconduct are handled appropriately?
Again, that's from the first question we had. It goes back to the accountability, holding ourselves to a better standard than the general public. We need to conduct ourselves appropriately and, again, hold ourselves accountable. Thank you.
It's not so much as a rebuttal, it's just a point of reference. The sheriff's office, we are not unionized, we don't have a union, so it's not that the sheriff has to work with the union when it comes to any disciplinary matters. He actually needs to work with his command staff and his supervisory staff, and also the merit commission as well. There are certain things that the sheriff can do by code as far as discipline is concerned, and there are other things than the merit commission, which is an independent board of civilians that make up the merit commission that would oversee hiring, firing, and any certain levels of discipline.
Stephen, I guess you'd like another 60 seconds?
Yes, and maybe a little longer with the permission of these guys, because I want to defend the take-home car program. I want to relate an experience that they probably don't know about, because they're too young. This is a failure, but it also shows you why we need this take-home car program. Many years ago, when I was a dispatcher back in about 1980, 81, we had 2 robberies up at the state line where you were just referring. It was Purple Martin gas station at that time. There was a murder occurred at each one. On the second one, that occurred 1 week later, we actually had a suspect we had information about where he was going, and we had to chase him, and we had to call out everybody. Unfortunately, there had been a death in the LaPorte City Police Department, and all the squad cars were getting washed by the trustees. Everybody had to race into the sheriff's department to get their cars. Now, this sounds like a failure. When we really needed it, it wasn't there, but it's a good demonstration of why that program is really necessary. It took all night and better to get that guy off the streets that committed 2 murders. And I get upset every time I hear this on Sound Off, somebody belly aching about the take-home car program.
Now you'd like another 60 seconds?
In regards to the take-home policy, there are pros and cons, as it's been brought up here. I choose to, I've got a business on the side. I have my own personal vehicle. My wife has her own personal vehicle. And so we choose to do that, drive our vehicles. As I see citizens here, and so you can appreciate having a vehicle where you don't have to fill that tank and fill that tank and fill that tank, and with the dollars that are or the gas prices are where they're at, it seems like the dollars just flow out of the pocket. So I understand that, and I can appreciate everything that you're doing, but we choose that. But the take-home policy does have some benefits, so we pretty much laid them out already. So I agree with that, but there are pros and cons. But I choose to try to be like the people here, because I'm just like you. Thank you.